Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Tavern Adjacent. Sorry it's another solo pod. We were supposed to have a guest this week, but things didn't work out, so here I am addressing you on the solo set. I don't mind though, I do love doing these, and you know what, it is an opportune time because today we've got another packed topic list. First up, we are going to be talking about Critical Role's Daggerheart, the newest RPG from Darrington Press, which a lot of people have touted as the D&D killer, which I think is dumb. And we're going to talk about why. Not because I think Daggerheart's going to be a bad game. I think it's going to be a good game, but because the idea of it being a D&D killer is silly for many other reasons. Again, we'll get to that. Then, after that, we are going to be talking about my DM Toolbox. This is something I want to talk about in like Tabletop Tavern Tips for a while, but I don't think it would make an independent video very well, so we're going to talk about it on the pod instead. And then finally, we are going to end it off by doing another campaign diary because I just had another awesome D&D session with my first ever boss fight with this new party, with this new campaign, and again, I want to talk about it. So yeah, there you go. That's our roster. That's our setup for today's episode. Hope you guys enjoy. Without further ado, let's get started. Okay, Daggerheart. So Daggerheart was recently revealed, kind of hush-hush. It wasn't really put out in a major way, but a select few got to experience the game at Gen Con, the Dungeons & Dragons convention. And for those of you going down to the description down below to ask me, or going down in the comments down below to ask me, Crispy, how did you enjoy Gen Con? Did you go? No. Crowds of people make my head hurt, and I think going to Gen Con would not be conducive to assisting with that. Though, you know, maybe next year if I get over that. But anyway, at Gen Con, at this TTRPG convention, the Daggerheart RPG from Critical Role and Darrington Press was revealed. I believe Comic Books Reads got to check it out and play it with none other than Travis Willingham, and I am interested. My interest is piqued. Is this something that I'm going to be dropping everything to play? No. Just like I predicted, I think a couple months ago during a Q&A. This is not something I'm going to drop everything to play, but it is something I might run a couple one-shots for. This is an extremely rules-light, narrative-heavy, improv-heavy system. In a system like this, there's a lot less like written down, here's what happens if this happens kind of things, and a lot more onus on the GM to improv what happens based on like the rule set the game provides. It's very, very rules light. It's a 2d12 system, which a lot of people did not expect. A lot of people were predicting this to be a d20 system, which falls in line with the whole D&D killer idea. Don't worry, we'll get to that. But anyway, I think this 2d12 system is pretty cool. Essentially, you roll the 2d12s, you add up the total, and then you see if you succeed, whatever you're trying to do. But here's the thing. You could roll really high. Like, let's say, for example, you roll a 21, 12 plus 9. That's pretty dang good. But there are two types of d12s. One of the d12s you're rolling is your fear dice. The other is your hope dice. And let's say if you roll a 12 on that fear dice and a 9 on that hope dice, you'll probably succeed the check, but there's going to be some negative pushback. Or if you roll higher on the hope dice and lower on the fear dice, even if you fail the check, there's going to be some positive consequences to that. I think that that's an interesting system to further vary up how DCs work in your games. I like it. It's interesting. On top of that, there is also a pretty brutal hit point system. Essentially, you're going to be constantly eroding hit points throughout playing this game. If you miss an attack, if you don't reach, like, essentially the armor class equivalent, you can still take damage, which is pretty hardcore. When you go down, also, you have three options. You can either go out in a blaze of glory, you can attempt to get up by rolling those fear and hope dice, and if fear is higher, you dead. Or you can take a permanent scarring injury. I'm assuming there's going to be some kind of table for that with the effects and the aesthetic differences and, you know, all that nonsense. These are like the basic rules rundowns. I don't have every single rule of the game memorized and all the gameplay, but the point is this. It's a 2d12 rules-light, narrative-focused system. And that's interesting. But the point that I'm going to be getting at with this segment isn't just talking about the RPG itself, it's talking about the discourse surrounding it. Because ever since Critical Role and Matt Mercer talked about Daggerheart. Like, it was just a little blurb at the end of a State of the Roll episode. It literally lasted like less than 2 minutes or so. They barely went into detail. But the moment they said we're looking at a long-form, narrative-focused RPG, the moment they said that, I see a bajillion videos coming out saying that Critical Role is going to kill D&D with their new RPG. And with Daggerheart's reveal, I am now certain that not only is Critical Role definitely not going to do that, which anyone with a brain could probably tell that was going to happen by just the word go, but now that we've seen the RPG, I am now certain that that's definitely not what Critical Role is even trying to accomplish with this thing. This is not a D&D supplant, and this is not a D&D substitute. This is a completely different game. If anything, it's more similar to, like, Powered by the Apocalypse. D&D 5e is often thought about as this super rules-light system, which, I've talked about this with Bob Worldbuilder, that's stupid. That's dumb. D&D 5e is not a rules-light system. Now, is it a rules-heavy system? No. Okay, it's not. But at the same time, pretending like D&D 5e doesn't have that many rules is completely idiotic. It's as if you have never played the game before. Like, people who say that, I'm convinced, I just bumped my stand. People who say that, I am convinced, have never played Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition in their life. Alright, again, it's not rules heavy, but it's not rules light either. Daggerheart is rules light. This is a game that you could probably pick up and play and figure out in a much more minimal amount of time. Like, this is the kind of game that you could play on like a board game night with your friends. Whereas D&D 5th edition, explaining all the rules of D&D 5th edition in one night, good lord. Learning everything about D&D 5e takes a long time, just like learning anything about a lot of different TTRPGs. They're trying to fill a different niche with Daggerheart. Darrington Press, Critical Role. This fills a completely different niche from what Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is. And I've already talked about this in a Q&A from a couple months ago. I just out and out said it. I really hate this whole D&D killer crap because you're framing all these cool projects, these cool new ideas, all the things they're doing, all you're framing it as is, but how does it compare to D&D 5th edition? How is it going to beat D&D 5th edition? It doesn't matter what neat new ideas are brought to the table. It's always going to be compared to what is already there. Not only that, that's expected, but not only that, it's also going to be expected to beat, to kill, to destroy what is already there, which as somebody, like seriously, anyone who has been in an entertainment industry, any aspect of the entertainment industry, whether it be video games, film, television, TTRPGs, doesn't matter. Anyone who's been in this industry long enough knows that this whole insert thing here killer narrative is profoundly stupid 99% of the time and sets up cool new ideas, cool new properties for failure from the word go. From the moment Daggerheart was announced to the public, before we even knew any details about what the game was, people were already assuming this was going to be like a Pathfinder type thing. This is going to be a D&D 5e rewrite. This is going to work into the world of Exandria. This is going to be Critical Role's newest RPG for the 4th campaign. Is there any evidence of that? No, there's not really much evidence of that at all. It's just speculation. Now, again, speculation is fun, but when it puts a false expectation on the team that's developing the game, it sucks. You want a great example that falls outside of the TTRPG space? Have you ever heard of Hytale? Hytale is a game being developed by the Hypixel team. I have great respect for Hypixel. They work in the Minecraft field. They run an incredible server, probably one of, if not the largest servers on the ecosystem. They've made some of the best mini games out there, some of the best adventure maps out there back when they did that. I mean, seriously, these guys have been in this space for years upon years now, and they've made some really cool things. And they decided, like, hey, let's make our own game. And so they released a trailer for Hytale, which is a Minecraft-esque mixed with Valheim thing, mixed with Skyrim. It's like take Minecraft and add a lot more RPG elements and a lot more multiplayer elements. I really like the idea, but the moment the Hytale trailer released, it blew up. With all of these claims that this is going to be the Minecraft killer, people speculating about features that were way outside of the team's pay grade, and they panicked. they freaked out and they went much more insular on how they deliver Hightail updates in the future because they don't want to set this false expectation for people. Before we even knew anything about Daggerheart, it was expected to kill Dungeons and Dragons, which is just an insane thing to put on a team that at this point has released what? Kandala Obscura, which is a lightweight, I don't mean like lightweight like bad, I mean like rules light system that mostly focuses on D6s, that falls within like supernatural horror kind of thing, and a card game. And I'm not trying to discount those games. They're great games. But at the end of the day, that's what Darrington Press has done. They've released D&D 5e supplements and those two games to my knowledge. Oh, and the Ukatoa board game. That one too. But do you understand how those two games and the experience that comes from making those two games doesn't lend itself to being the D&D killer? And then the moment they were like, hey, let's make a narrative RPG, everyone already makes that assumption off the bat. Also, understand that a big part of my problem with this whole narrative is intention. Remember, the intention of the devs, I don't think they're trying to make a 5e supplant. I don't think they're trying to make a 5e replacement. Okay? I think that is crazy. Now, something like Flea Mortals from Matt Colville, the book I never shut up about, I claim that book made the monster manual irrelevant. Now, I was, exaggerating for color, but my point is that book was going out of its way to be Monster Manual 2.0. That's what it was attempting. It was taking existing D&D monsters and transforming them into a more action-oriented play style, adding in rules to make them more dynamic, more engaging, to make them better. Now, does it necessarily mean that it makes the Monster Manual completely bad? No, it's a different style. At the end of the day, it's not necessarily better, it's just different. Somebody who wants more simple monsters is not going to like Flea Mortals. But in my opinion, that book added a lot to what already was there. It intended to create more engaging monsters, and I think it succeeded in not just making more engaging monsters, but better monsters. Hence why I was comfortable saying that Flea Mortals supplanted the Monster Manual, D&D 5e's Monster Manual. But Daggerheart isn't trying any of that. Its intent is to be a more rules-light narrative system that falls outside of the existing niche of D&D 5th edition. Based on, again, just what I've seen, I think that's plain and obvious. All right, come on, it's not even a D20 system for crying out loud. It's not even using even the same ballpark of rule set. And yet, it doesn't stop the narrative from trugging on. Usually, even though we love these dramatic narratives in the D&D space, those dramatic narratives don't carry themselves over to real life. This whole David and Goliath situation where the little indie RPG takes on the established IP, destroys it for all time. How often does that actually happen? I mean, with all of the indie stuff that's released these days, you would be aware that the vast majority of them don't get to stardom. And I'm not trying to crap on indie games. I love indie games as much as the next guy, but they usually fill their own niche, okay? The narrative of the big industry killer, the huge shakeup, it's usually a myth. And I understand that a lot of people get really upset at me when I say things like that. Well, I mean, I already said this in the Q&A, and no one really seemed to get that mad about it, so, I guess I'll just go with the assumption that a lot of you guys agree with me on this. Look, it's a sweet myth, but it's a myth nonetheless. And putting the expectation on Daggerheart to be the D&D killer, God, it's setting it up for, in my opinion, a press disaster when it finally releases. You know what? Another parallel to Hightail, that game I mentioned earlier, another great parallel. After the initial announcement, did Critical Role send out these advanced Daggerheart copies to a ton of YouTubers? No, they didn't. They kept it pretty freaking low-key, all things considered. And I think for good reason. I think they're trying to prevent that nonsense D&D killer crap. I think they're trying to avoid that narrative because they know that, one, it's an expectation that is ridiculous to put on the team. Two, the game they're trying to create does not fall within the Dungeons & Dragons niche. And three, a lot of the possible customers that they're going to be appealing to are D&D fans. And the framing of the D&D killer is a horrible label to put on you when you're trying to fit that into a similar niche. Not the same niche, but even a similar one. I mean, God, back when World of Warcraft was like the biggest MMO ever, and it wasn't even close. Like, it had zero competition. Look how many games try to take that same spotlight. Like, look at something like Rift. The developers calling their game the World of Warcraft killer or labeling themselves as "you're not in Azeroth anymore," that didn't help them. That alienated potential audiences. It hurt the games in the long run. I mean, how many of those MMOs survived for even a couple years? Not many. Death of the Game, Nerdslayer series is filled with WoW wannabes that tried to be the big-time WoW killer and at the end of the day, failed. I don't want that to happen to Daggerheart, but the most painful part is it's not even the Critical Role team that's doing that kind of stupid marketing. It's not them. There's a bunch of people on the internet who take the basic idea of narrative RPG and are like, oh yeah, brand new narrative RPG, that's going to be the D&D killer, guys. Let's make a bunch of red text, red circle, red X thumbnails and call it a day. Look, I'm a YouTuber too, all right? I'm a scummy YouTuber too. I'm right here. I make a bunch of red text, clickbait, title thumbnails all the time. For the love of God, I cover Reddit drama, all right? I'm not here to judge clickbait. But at the end of the day, if you're going to bait like that, you got to do it in a way that's sensible. And this kind of speculation is, one, not sensible, and two, I think it's actively harmful to what Critical Role is trying to put out here. Look at this game on its own merits. Look at what it does on its own. Don't title your review The D&D Killer, period. As if that's what it is. Because it's not. All you're doing is alienating people who might want to check it out and putting an expectation on the team that is frankly impossible. I'm really worried about Daggerheart, guys. Like, legitimately I am. I'm enthusiastic about some of the ideas they put forward. I think it's interesting that they're doing like a Cuphead-esque game design, where the game is really simple and easy to get into, but kind of hardcore gameplay-wise. I mean, it's an interesting niche they're trying to fill. But I'm worried that the comparison to D&D 5th edition is going to draw unwanted attention. I think it would be fine if people just talked about this game on its own merits, talked about it like it was its own thing, and people who play 5th edition, who play Pathfinder, could look at it and think, oh, you know, that looks interesting, and jump in if they're interested. But right now, it's being framed through a completely different lens, advertising it as something that it's not. All right? It's not a D&D 5e rewrite. It's not a Pathfinder spinoff. It's none of that. If anything, it's more like Powered by the Apocalypse, which is a game that for some ungodly reason is not contained in the vast majority of these discussions, even though it has many more similarities to what Daggerheart is trying to do. In case you can't tell, like, this whole discussion is so frustrating for me. Because I feel it, man. I feel it. I was a big fan of the high-pixel and high-tail community when that trailer first dropped, and I watched as the team became more insular because they were afraid of the expectations being put on them. Because they were afraid of getting the label the Minecraft killer, which is even crazier than the D&D killer, in my opinion. And yeah, they were afraid for good reason. It's unrealistic, and it's frankly stupid. Not everything needs to be a competition, a fight to the death. Some things can just exist in the same niche. You want to know what happens almost every time with these insert big thing here killers? Number one, the killer dies off within the first few months. Or number two, the killer takes a small portion of the ecosystem, builds its own audience, and they exist in the same space. All right? Pathfinder, boom. It's really not that crazy, guys. That is probably, almost definitely, actually just definitely what's going to happen. And I feel like because that's probably what's going to happen, people are going to get disappointed. They want this to be more than it is. But I don't think it needs to be. It's cool on its own. Look at it on its own. Admire it for what it's trying to do. Critique it for what you don't like right now. I've seen a lot of critiques, trust me. And then play the game. Don't play the game trying to hope that this is going to kill off some other game. Because that's stupid. I don't really have any other word for it. I'm sorry. But yeah, there you go. That's my Daggerheart talk. I wish I could focus more on the mechanics of the game and the things it's trying to do. But because of the talk around this game, it's kind of hard to do that. But anyway, that's the last we're going to talk about this whole Daggerheart D&D killer nonsense, at least for a while, I hope. I think it's time to talk about my TTRPG and D&D Toolbox. I refined it a lot going into my third full homebrew campaign, and I've had a lot of fun doing it. So without further ado, guys, let's get started. Took a 20-minute break to read some Owl House comics, but then the 20-minute break turned into like a 40-minute break, so whoopsie-doozy. They're really good comics. Anyway, my D&D Toolbox. Really, it could be a TTRPG toolbox, but right now, I'm running my third Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition campaign, specifically one with my Tavern Tales rewrite, where I rewrote character origins and I added in a bunch of other features like looting, crafting, all that stuff, to make the game more my own, more fitting to what my group desires, which we'll talk about more in the campaign diary. But anyway, D&D 5e is hard to prep sometimes. All TTRPGs are hard to prep. And early on, I really struggled to prep succinctly and to get a lot done with my session planning. But, by creating a toolbox, it's made it so much easier. Basically, my toolbox is a giant Google Drive of D&D materials that has organized all of my item cards and my tokens and my stat blocks and all of that, so that it's nice and easy for me to just pull out stuff and then put it onto my session prep documents. There's still a lot of things I need to write personally, but with this toolbox, it's cut down that writing time, that searching time by a lot. Instead of having to flip through the entire narrative of Flea Mortals, instead of flipping through the entire book, now I can just go to my aberration folder and pull out my aberrations, right? By doing this, it's made session planning way faster. So I decided, hey, I should talk about this. It's made my planning much easier. Hopefully it can help you. Now, it's not just my Google Drive that is part of the toolbox. We'll go over everything I use. For starters, IDM Online, and a mandatory part of that is a virtual tabletop. And in my opinion, you can't do better than Foundry. Roll20 doesn't even come close to the level that Foundry is at. I understand that Roll20, you can use it for free, which is awesome for beginners, but Foundry, it's just a one-time payment, and you have access to, in my opinion, the best VTT on the market, with a clean HUD, lots of additions, an awesome community with lots of tutorial videos to help you out, awesome animated features, lots of organization features so that you can have all your maps and neat folders and have folders in those folders, color code everything. Your tokens can be all organized. You have journal entries so you can have in VTT notes. There's lots of in VTT character sheets and all that if you want to use that as well. A lot of these features are optional, but the features that I use, and I'm only using like half of them, are excellent. I would recommend Foundry to anyone 100%. I think it is far better than Roll20. I think it's far better than anything else on the market. It's got such a user-friendly pricing model. It's a user-friendly interface. It's user-friendly in general. And on top of that, the community is excellent and very, very helpful. It's got an amazing Discord. Like, every time I ran into technical difficulties, I went to that Discord and got an answer to my woes within 10 minutes. It's great. Love it. But yeah, there you go. Foundry is the VTT I use, main part of the toolbox. The other software that I use is Kenku FM, another mandatory thing for me as a dungeon master who uses a lot of ambience, sound effects, music to make my game super immersive. Kenku is a must. This allows me to organize all my sound effects into a neat little soundboard and all of my music into neat folders. It even allows me to put pictures on them, custom images, to make organizing them much, much easier. I love it. It also allows me to open up a YouTube tab to play YouTube directly into my Discord call, which is also amazing. Like, seriously, I would use it just for that feature alone, but with the addition of the soundboard and the custom playlist settings and all that, it's so useful. Kenku is such a great program, and on top of that, you don't even need to pay for it, though I recommend that you do, because the team that made this deserves all the love in the world. This is a brilliant application that I absolutely love using. It's so easy to use. Unlike something like Sirenscape, you do need to upload your sound effects, but if anything, I think that makes it better. Sirenscape has a god-awful HUD, in my opinion. It is the opposite of user-friendly. There's way too much going on there. And on top of that, it's subscription. Ugh, gross. Kenku FM, as long as you upload your own stuff, it is amazing. It is a mandatory part of my sessions, and I use it every single time. It's what I used in Shadow of Carconos. If you're wondering if all those sound effects and ambience, all that, if that's edited in, a lot of it is adjusted in editing, but that was all live. And in fact, Dana the Drake recently came to me and asked me how to use Kenku FM because he wants to use it in his game too. It made a real impression on him. So hey, you got a little Dana the Drake endorsement on top of my endorsement right here. It's a brilliant, brilliant app. So yeah, Kenku FM is another big part of it. I use Google Docs to organize all of my notes, as many people do. My primary book is Flee Immortals. It's pretty much the only D&D book that I actively use. I actually use the player's handbook for the first time while making characters, mostly for class stuff, because we were doing a lot of stuff with our computers already, since I had shared with them a ton of documents for my homebrew, Tales from the Tavern features. So I used the player's handbook to create characters because I didn't want to add another tab on top of all the other things they were already balancing. I wanted the stuff that was base D&D to be in the book instead, and it was great to use that. But the only book I really use actively, like I said, Flee Mortals, is the only book I use for my monsters. And other than that, I occasionally break out my my D&D monster stat block generator to create stat blocks myself if I need something custom made. Other than that, that covers the monsters. I screenshot the stat blocks and I put them into my own Google Drive folder, which I won't be sharing for obvious copyright reasons. But yeah, that's how I organize them. I organize them into these neat little folders. I also organize my tokens in a similar way. I usually make the tokens in advance because generally if it's in Flee Mortals, it's probably going to be used at some point. And it's just useful to have a bunch of tokens used in bulk. I have them all organized in Google Drive. There's a big old folder where you can see all the tokens. And there's also tokens organized into monster categories and such. Now, that covers the monsters. I got the stat block, got the tokens, and I upload those tokens to Foundry. Other than that, I also use Griffin's Saddlebag for my items. I make my own item cards. I understand that Griffin's Saddlebag sells item cards you can buy. I decided to make them myself because sometimes I want to have different artwork or I want to adjust the perks in some way to fit into my sandbox. Again, we are running a revision of 5th edition, so there are changes. Because of that, I often create the cards myself. In fact, I always create the cards myself. Again, organize them into these neat color-coded folders. Obviously, can't share this with you guys because a lot of these items weren't made by me, though some of them are, such as the Ashen Icon. I love this thing. It's like it's a Destiny gun that I transformed into a D&D item. I mean, I use the appearance of it because it just looks like a fantasy gun, but I transformed it into be this lightning railgun that unleashes massive blasts when you get a multi-kill. I think it's really fun. But yeah, I use GIMP to create all of these item cards. I cut out the image I want to use, stick it onto the card. I create the description, grab a perk icon from a game like Destiny or Ghost of Tsushima, stick it on there, and then boom, you got an item card organized out by rarity. I could probably create the organization into like item categories too, such as consumable, trinket, weapon, armor, etc. But organizing them out by rarity has worked out for me. At this point, though, we're up to like 80 items or something like that. So there is a lot in that toolbox already. But making the items in advance is great because I know at some point my party are probably going to fight a kobold. So having loot ready for kobolds is good. Or loot ready for undead. Or loot ready for aberrations, etc., etc., etc. In this new campaign, I'm probably going to talk about this in the future during Campaign Diary, but in this new campaign, I'm trying to make all the loot my players achieve and get, I'm trying to make it more connected to the things they get it from. Often, in my first and even my second campaign, I had the loot be fairly divorced from the monsters that they were defeating or what they were doing in that moment, and I don't like that. I want it to be connected more closely. Like in Destiny 2, I love it when the armor looks like the remains of the creature you killed. The touch of malice from Kingsfall literally being the heart of Oryx combined with the drapes of his Death Singer children. I mean, that's awesome. And it looks like something that comes out of the Kingsfall raid. You can literally see those materials. So I think that is awesome, and I want to translate that in my D&D game, where if you defeat a griffin, you can use its feathers to create some kind of avian-themed bow. Or if you defeat a pack of kobolds, you can enchant one of their hands to create a kobold diviner's hand to assist you in the future. I really want that for the future of my games, but that means I need to create a lot of items, and hence the toolbox really helps me with that. Again, creating these things in advance is great because it means that later on, I don't need to do it last minute. It means that I don't need to be stressing about, I need to create this item and I need to create this token. I need to have this stat block ready and find this stat block in the book and search through all this, blah, 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 blah. No, none of that nonsense. Instead, that stuff is already ready and I get to focus on the things that really matter. Stuff like taking down notes for the session, stuff like organizing the notes out, writing out descriptions, stuff like that. If I have it, the more I have it ready in advance, the less I need to stress last minute, and the better the session generally is. I recommend creating a toolbox like this for any sort of game. I also have tools that I use for in-person games, though I haven't had to do that in a really long time since Foundry is just so awesome that I usually use it in in-person games anyway with a big TV to display the VTT. But speaking of, actually, I forgot, the other thing I use is maps. Sei and Peiku are my go-to for all the maps I use. You literally use them for everything. I combine that with some add-ons I put in Foundry, add-ons that put in animated weather effects. I love stuff like this. It makes the maps so much more vibrant and great. I do know that Sei and Peiku do animated maps, but I don't usually use the base coloring because they make a bunch of variations of their maps. I'm not usually using the base variation, which is the thing that they are usually animating. I use something else. So that means I can't often use the animated maps, but thanks to the weather filters on Foundry, I can make animated maps myself anyway, and it's brilliant. I love it. So yeah, that's how I create maps in my games as well. I think that covers everything. I think that's everything I use. For in-person maps, I use Dungeon Craft, which I think I did a sponsorship for them a while ago. I also recommend that 100%. Sometimes I'll have like in-person little trinkets and stuff. A lot of them make appearances in sets, but stuff like, this lantern or these healing potions will pop up on the table. Ow, I bumped my elbow again. That hurt. But yeah, that's, again, few and farther between because I'm usually running online, which I'm happy with. I think a lot of people give online D&D crap, which I don't think is necessary. I think it's perfectly valid. I actually think it's a lot of fun. But yeah, that is my D&D toolbox. I, was tempted to make a full video based on this topic, but instead, I focused on this instead. I really love working with Foundry, playing D&D online, using all of these materials. It makes the game so much easier to run and so much more fun to run. And frankly, I'm an organization guy. I'm Andy Edison. I could spend hours doing this kind of stuff. And sometimes I get sucked into just prepping random things, making monsters that I really don't need. Like, for example, Tales from the Tavern, it's not just rewriting origins, it also rewrites a lot of monsters. And, I sometimes rewrite monsters I'm definitely not going to use anytime soon. Like, I rewrote the Behir, the Roper werewolf. I'm making a whole new Wood Elven race. Probably not going to use that anytime soon. But hey, I'm making it just in case. And it's fun. Sometimes doing the extra stuff is enjoyable. It doesn't take precedent over the stuff that you need to do in the moment, but it doesn't hurt to occasionally do something that you just want to do for fun. And organizing out this stuff, I think that's really fun. So yeah, there you go. That is my huge D&D organization lecture nonsense, my huge toolbox that I use to make my games much easier to run. Without further ado, though, I think it's time to actually talk about my game because this past Friday, we ran our first ever boss battle, but there were some difficulties, some minor scheduling horror stories that made it a little bit more difficult and a little bit more sussy. So, without further ado, I think it's time to jump into our campaign diary set, turn down the lights, turn up the ambience, and get into the campaign diary for my third D&D campaign, The House of Devils. Let's get started. We're back. Hey guys. Probably going to turn on some ambience for this just because I think it will fit the aesthetic. But we're back with the comfy vibe. And we're going to be talking about... I almost called it Descent into the Veil. No, that is my second campaign. My third campaign, House of Devils. Session 2. So last session, the party enlisted in a competition to become guardians of the village of Himika. Guardians known as the Snow Striders, warriors empowered by the village elder to trek and fight in the frozen wilderness of Iselheim, the land in which they inhabit. And their first challenge was to defeat a group of already experienced Snow Striders in combat. They fought the Grave Order, a group of pirates that participated in a war against a great lich known as the Nightmare King. And through their participation, they unfortunately gained some necrotic abilities because their ship crashed and it was all bad sorts. But anyway, the point is the party fought them and won. Good job. First battle, level 3. Their next challenge, after a short rest, is to take on an owlbear. Now, I'm starving the party a little bit here. The Grave Order fight was not an easy battle. There was lots of adds, lots of damage needed to be dealt, and lots of resources were expended. Our Barbarian was especially feeling the pain, as he is a Barbarian with access to Frenzied Rage, which is awesome, allows him to take more attacks, but it's not awesome in the sense that he suffers points of exhaustion. Now, I have a more merciful exhaustion system in my games. I'm using the 1D&D exhaustion system, where you essentially just subtract a certain amount to your rolls at each level, with the amount you subtract increasing at each level. But you do die when you reach 6 levels of exhaustion in my games. At that point, you will be unable to roll death saving throws. If you hit 0 hit points when you have 6 levels of exhaustion, you're just dead. And if you don't get sleep within 12 hours, you collapse and die. So obviously, he's already at 2 levels of exhaustion, and if he hits 0 hit points, he gains levels of exhaustion on top of the exhaustion he gains from expending his Frenzied Rage. So he's feeling that pain a little bit. He's got to be a bit more strategic with how he does Frenzied Rage, otherwise he might lose his character, his Barbarian. The Bard is also feeling the pain a little bit. She'd already expended a lot of spell slots. Whereas our Paladin, our Warlock, they're feeling fine. Warlocks regain their spell slots at a short rest, and our Paladin was very conservative with how he used his abilities. Our Artificer was not present for this session, not this section. This whole session he was not there because of scheduling things, the bane of D&D parties. But he was there in spirit. I decided to have his character simply not be present, as I didn't believe a 5th player character would be necessary. I thought that the fight would be challenging, but as long as they took a long rest after the owlbear fight, I thought the final boss of the session would not be too hard. And that's what they ended up doing, so I wasn't really sweating it too much. But obviously, if the Artificer was there, the fight would have been slightly easier, and I probably would have had to buff it up just a tad. The point is, the session started with a skill challenge, the party trekking through the wilderness, tracking down this owlbear. I was a lot more flowery with my descriptions of the environment around them. I pre-wrote them out, got some resources online to help me, because I just want to generate that stuff nice and quickly, so I don't need to waste time writing flowery language. It's really not my thing. I'm a quick, to-the-point kind of author, so it's not really my jam. But I got those descriptions out of the way early, wrote them down so that I don't have to improv them, and it made the session a lot more immersive. Skill challenges, for me, can sometimes be boring for my players, but if I add a lot of descriptions on top of that, with the travel being more thoroughly described, it makes it a lot more interesting. During the tracking of the owlbear, they found a dead griffin, which is very concerning. These beasts are very important to the Hemakin villagers and to the Snowstriders, and finding one that was literally torn in half is kind of a big deal. And the party were worried, like, oh, this must have been the owlbear we're tracking. Duh. Like, there are big, like, beak holes in its body, so they assume, like, oh, this was definitely the owlbear. I had them roll a nature check, and while an owlbear can take down a griffin, I pointed out that would be very difficult, that even though owlbears can jump, they can climb up trees, griffins can straight up fly, which would mean that the owlbear would have some struggle. That put some doubt in the player's mind, like, maybe there's another threat out there. Now, they are racing to accomplish this task. They are racing to find this owlbear because the other teams are also trying to find their own quarries. And if they find their quarries first, then that means they become Snowstriders instead. So the party are trying to find this owlbear ASAP. They eventually find the owlbear, or should I say the owlbear finds them, ambushes the party, and deals so much damage to the Warlock. I rolled a nat 20 and dealt 22 points of damage. I was not expecting that, and that knocked the Warlock outright out and quick. That was a rough way to start the battle, but luckily the Barbarian, throughout this entire session, that guy was rolling like a god. He was rolling like crazy, so crazy, I didn't believe him. I thought I was lying, but some of my players lived together, and so they just looked over and were like, nope, he's legit. That guy didn't roll below 10. I think he rolled below 10 like once the whole game. It was insane, but he was rolling crazy. Though, at the end of the day, it didn't really matter. The owlbear still downed him, and because he was downed, gained 1 point of exhaustion, he also frenzy raged another point of exhaustion. At this point, he's at 4 points of exhaustion. Luckily, the Paladin and the Warlock, who was brought back, managed to down the owlbear. It ran away. They dealt with some wolves that joined the fray, and the Barbarian was back up. However, 4 levels of exhaustion is no joke in this game. 2 more and he's dead. If he expends his Frenzied Rage and goes down 0 points again, that's it. they've either got to take a long rest or they've got to be really careful. They decide to take a long rest, risking the fact that they are going to lose this hunt. At this point, they've realized the owlbear is not the main threat. They've met up with another team who have determined that something in the sky is attacking griffins in the valley and attacking other creatures, and this is very concerning. It's also beginning to snow, which makes sense. They are in the far northern continent, which is in the middle of the magical Everwinter. However, the wards of the sacred land, the wards of the village that they live in, should protect them from the supernatural snow of the Everwinter, and it's not. It's snowing a lot, which is a little bit concerning, but a problem for another day. The party joined this group of NPCs, these two NPCs, that they grew rather a liking to. One of them was a pre-established NPC who showed up in the first session. She was an NPC requested by one of the player characters who wanted a pre-established relationship before the campaign started, which I thought was really cool. So she was there, as well as a brand new NPC, a wood elf named Samson, a novice wood elven druid, who I threw in there for the funsies. I wanted another character to balance out the party's more jokey members. He was more of a straight man, which I thought was fun. If I had to compare it to anyone, Hunter from the Owl House is like a close-ish comparison, but not exact. Anyway, the point is, the party find their owlbear quarry already dead, ripped in half by whatever they are tracking, which is obviously very scary for them as that owlbear put up a hell of a fight. Eventually, they find the lair of this creature. I had the NPCs offer the players a choice. The NPCs would either stay outside to hold off some wolves that were coming to scavenge this unknown creature's victims, or the two NPCs could accompany the party into the lair and risk the wolves coming in and interrupting them mid-fight. One of the players pointed out, hey, me and the other human, me and the satyr, actually, we can't see in the dark. Why don't we stay outside? And I just straight up told them, look, man, it's going to be a pain in the butt for me to run 2 encounters like that. Are you okay with just keeping the party together? And they were like, yeah, we're the player characters. I was mostly just joking. That might be a controversial move for some dungeon masters. Me just straight up telling them, you're the player character. You should probably stick together. But for me, I thought it was a necessary one. And my players are okay with me sometimes breaking game like that. They're okay with me sometimes just directing them in a game sense like that, because if I had to run 2 encounters, the session would have been worse. I know the session would have been worse because I've tried that before, and it was bad. I explained it in a way in-game, and then explained the out-of-game reason. The in-game reason is because the 2 NPCs are experienced with hunting the wolves. It's also their quarry for the proving, so it makes sense that they would be the ones to stay outside if anyone was going to do so. And the out-of-game reason is you're the player character. You should probably stick together. Otherwise, we're probably going to have a worse-off session overall. Both reasons were enough to convince the players, more than enough, in fact. And he revealed that he was joking in the end, so it didn't really matter. I understand that, again, that might be a controversial move, but for my games, it works out that way. They enter the lair and find a lot more dead griffins, and eventually find the final boss of this session and the final boss of this mini arc, this 2-session proving arc, Skoga, the kin killer, a cannibal griffin. I actually talked about this idea with Puffin Forest. I liked it so much, I had it be the first boss of this session. It is a very intimidating foe using the Fleeing Mortals action-oriented monster system. It's not actually from Fleeing Mortals, the book. It is a homebrew monster I found a long time ago, but never ever used. I think that it is a monster that is pretty good. It's not as good as Fleeing Mortals, but I think it is a really well-designed beast. Its main mechanic is prone. It knocks creatures prone and gets increased effects when it does so. A lot of its abilities are based around knocking creatures prone. I think that, for me, this was a difficult monster to run because often I don't have monsters move that much. I have them move other people. Vecna, for example, Nightmare King, the final boss of my second campaign, the Nightmare King was very much a stationary boss, but he used his abilities to move the players instead. That's often how my bosses roll out. I don't usually have very mobile bosses, but Skoga, the kin killer, this flying griffin, it is a very mobile boss, and I wasn't really thinking that through. So this was a bit of a struggle for me mentality-wise. I needed to think differently on how I ran this boss. But it wasn't a disaster by any means. I think Skoga ended up being a really great boss fight for my players to engage with. The first phase had them fighting it within its lair. It had no lair actions. This is a really early fight, and I didn't want to include lair actions on top of all the other mechanics they're dealing with. Right now, they're dealing with using a lot of the features introduced in Tales from the Tavern. Their background features, their racial features. These are all new things that I homebrewed, and I think that they were using them really, really well. Now, it's important to note that a lot of the background features I gave them, they are for downtime. But my barbarian, our barbarian, the big boy frenzy guy, he used a background that gave him a lot of features that focus on combat instead. And that makes him probably the most optimized member of the party by far, with the exception of the fact that he's, if he hits 0 hit points while he's frenzied raged, it's a pretty big deal for him. When he hits 0 hit points, he gains 2 levels exhaustion per downing instead of 1, because if he's in a frenzied rage, that's another level of exhaustion gained. And again, if you get 6, that's really bad for you. And every time you get levels of exhaustion, your dice luck, your dice rolls are getting more and more subtracted from. So he's not optimized in that sense, but he's a very powerful damage dealer and a very powerful and potent tank. And he was really great in this fight because Skoga is a physical beast. It's scratching, it's clawing, it's bludgeoning damage, slashing damage, all that. He's resistant to that damage. So he's in a pretty good spot. But unfortunately, he wasn't paying attention to his positioning, so Skoga managed to push him off a cliff. This took him out of an entire round of combat with him trying to climb back up that cliff. Now, luckily, the Soul-Sworn Bard, she's a vampire creature and she has climbing speed. That allowed her to very easily assist him in getting back up the cliff. But again, that expended her turn. While the party were helping each other out, that, puts them not in favor of the action economy. They're losing out on turns because they've got to get the barbarian back up this cliff. It's a clever way for me to put player characters out of commission even without dealing damage. There are other ways to give player characters negative consequences. The barbarian had bad positioning, but he didn't take any damage. He just fell off a cliff. He didn't die or anything. He just was put out of commission for that round, and the barbarian had to help him out. The bard had to help him out. Sorry, these dang B names for the classes. The point is, there are other ways to hurt your players other than hurting them hit point wise. Skoga had 2 main phases. The first phase was in her lair. The second phase, she flew off to the village. The party had to chase her down. They ran past some wolves, which meant to be a bit of an in-between. However, I ended up making the DC to run away from the wolves lower because they were down a player character. And I didn't want the wolves to put too much of a barrier between them and Skoga. If the other player character was there, I would have increased the DC, but because he was absent, I ended up lowering it, and they ended up skipping the wolves, which I don't think was a loss at all. If the other player character was there, I think that would have been more of a big deal, but here, not as big of a deal, not at all. At this point, when they found Skoga, they encountered it, but they also encountered that absent player character. I wanted to work him into the session somehow, so I had him try to attack the beast one-on-one. Basically, while the party were chasing this monster, the absent player character, the artificer, he was trying to hold it off. Obviously, he failed. He was one person fighting against a boss that required many people to take down, so he was knocked unconscious, not bleeding out or anything, just knocked unconscious, while the other 4 player characters tagged in to finish off the kin killer. Now, in Tales from the Tavern, there are other mechanics for bosses on top of the villain actions that Matt Colville introduced. When each villain action is expended, the boss gains abilities. This is something I talked about during my Flea Mortals review from the last episode of Tavern Adjacent. I like evolving bosses that gain abilities, bosses that shift. Skoga gained a bonus action fear effect, a reaction to push players away, and a mega recharge ability similar to a dragon's breath attack. I never ended up using that recharge ability because it wasn't practical in that moment, but the fear effect and the knockdown, I use those a lot. I think when you're trying to add abilities onto a boss, add them to the bonus action, the reaction, add them onto what's already there so that they actually come into play. If it's a full action to use these, it's not going to come into play as much. I think the best D&D combats are 4 or 5 rounds for a boss. Maybe 6 if you're pushing it, but I try to keep it on that lower end because I want to keep it snappy. That means that I want to add these additional abilities onto what they're already doing. I don't want these abilities to necessarily replace what's already there. I want it to be more. I want the fight to evolve in that sense. And that's what I try to do with Skoga. I will say that I often forgot to use these additional abilities because they weren't properly notated on my notes. It's a good reason why you should focus on organizing your notes, not just writing them down. Organized notes are going to be easier to read, and that's why I often forgot them. But Anyway, Skoga was a pretty intimidating dang boss. It ended up downing half the party. 2 players were remaining, the Barbarian and the Warlock. The Barbarian at stupid low hit points and the Warlock with low spell slots. But in the end, the Warlock managed to land a pretty high damage Eldritch Blast, taking down Skoga, the Kin Killer, once and for all. The party were declared Snowstriders along with those NPCs that helped them out. At the party's request, which I thought was pretty cool, the party ended up going to the Elder and saying, like, hey, these NPCs, they helped us out. They also deserve to be Snowstriders, which I thought was really neat. Showed that they cared about these NPCs that they only met for these 2 sessions. There was a lot of role-playing with the party going to an event, to a tavern party, and partying it up together as a party. Dang, those 2 words are going to get really confusing from now on. Anyway, as a group, they enjoyed the night together. I got a lot of fun out of watching them roleplay amongst themselves. I added a new player in, David, the Warlock. His character's name is not David. That's his name. They all gave me approval to use their names, by the way. But the point is that David is more of an in-character roleplayer. He roleplays a lot in the first person. I think it pushes the other players to do the same. They've never roleplayed in first person this much. I think the media they consume is also helping. They've all been engaging much more in Critical Role and Legend of Vox Machina, media like that, and that makes them a lot more into the nerdier, like, first-person roleplay aspects. They didn't do that before, and that's not a bad thing. You know, people have different comfort levels, but for me, I think that this is really great since I love first-person roleplay. I also love how they're doing things their characters would do. The Soulsworn Bard, she uses her bardic vampiric charms to charm some men into buying the group drinks just for the fun of it. The Warlock and the Barbarian have a little prank contest, while the Paladin has a heart-to-heart with that Wood Elven NPC about what happened in the caves. I also foreshadowed the next session with the next objective that they're going to need to accomplish. I had a lot of fun with this. The Warlock also investigates some mysteries with his patron. I had an NPC realized the patron was present. The Warlock has been keeping their patron kind of on the down low, but the NPC, I had noticed the patron instead, which I think adds a little bit of mysticism to this NPC, like, oh yeah, I've been around. I know a Warlock patron when I see them, even when they're not fully visible. So I thought that was a lot of fun. Gave some character to a minor NPC, and I think that's always a good thing. Try to do little quirks like that. Little moments like that can give a lot of character to people that don't necessarily appear all that much. It's a trick I've used in every single one of my campaigns, and creates memorable NPCs for my players to interact with, even if the moments are small. But yeah, that's Session 2. I think Session 2 went really, really well. Our first boss fight, our first real challenging moment in the campaign. The Grave Order fight from last session was hard, but this took it to a new level. I mean, the Barbarian was really struggling with those 4 levels of exhaustion, close on the verge of death, and all of the party were really, really edging that line between life and death at this final boss fight, but they managed to eke through, and even though there was some scheduling problems, I think we had a lot of fun with it. Next session, there's going to be big lore reveals about the overall story of the campaign. This story was rarely self-contained. You know, it was basically a tournament arc where they competed to achieve a rank in the village. Now that that's done, I'm going to show them where the wider story of the campaign is going to go, how they're going to journey into the rest of Alisolheim, how it's going to tie into their characters, lots of big lore mysteries and lore reveals, and I am so, so excited for it. I'm so excited for the choices my players are going to be forced to make, the places they're going to visit. Oh man, it's hype. I don't have any other word for it. I love running Dungeons & Dragons, in case you can't tell by the way I talk about it. I love running for these people, and even though I didn't have all of them for this session, it was a great joy to have them all there for this. So, yeah, there you go. House of Devils Session 2. A success, I will say. I can't wait to talk about Session 3 next week, but without further ado, I think it is time to move on to Thing of the Week, which I've already kind of brought up a couple times this episode, but I got a lot more to say about it, so yeah, hit the thing. Alright, the framing of this shot isn't perfect, but I'm trying my best here because for some reason I'm recording these in chronological order, even if I've changed sets. But the point is, my Thing of the Week this week is The Owl House. This show is so good. How have I never seen this before? Now, back when Season 2 was premiering, I did see a meme of The Owl House, but I had never like actually watched the show, and for some reason I just spontaneously was like, I finished The Wire, which was a very realistic, very gritty, very sad often show that at the same time was actually pretty funny. But the point is, I finished The Wire, and I was thinking, okay, I gotta watch something else. I've been watching The Wire for a couple months now. Before that, I was watching Community. I've been watching Critical Role a lot now, but I want something that I can like watch, something that I can spend my nights watching. And I was just like, hey, The Owl House, what the heck? Because I saw a Luce and Amity compilation, and I watched a couple clips, and I was like, this is really cute. I'll check this out. And oh my God, I watched the whole of season 1 in one day. Like, I didn't get much done that day. This was just supposed to be something, I watch a couple episodes before I go to bed, that kind of thing. But no, I was hooked. I mean, you can call me an Owl House girly, because that's what I am, dude. I'm a fan of this show. I love it so, so much. The animation is superb. The world is really cute and wonderful. The premise is simple. Human girl falls into the witch world, learns to become a witch, and learns more about herself. Great, awesome. Simple premise, and they execute it to the fullest degree. The villain is really, really good. The romance is incredible. Seriously, this Luz and Amity... Spoilers, I guess, they get together. Everyone knows about them, though. I mean, I heard about them before, but... I mean, man, this might be one of my favorite romances I've ever seen, period. It's so cute. It's so well done. It's so healthy in its portrayal. I mean, dang, they did such a good job with this show. Every aspect of it, you can tell it's a labor of love. You can tell the people who make this care. I said that about Flea Mortals, like... The amount of give a crap in this product is overwhelming. I said the same thing about Flea Mortals, and I'll say the same thing about Owl House. I can tell that the people who made this love making the show, love writing these characters, and love making the story. I am at the Season 2 finale. I'm looking forward to watching the Season 2 finale, and I am absolutely going to watch the final, specials as a movie. I'm going to watch them all in one sitting. I'm so excited to do that. I'm really excited to watch the end of the story. It's been such a journey. And you know what? Beyond the story, my engagement with this series is probably not going to be done. Because, I jumped into the community of the Owl House yesterday, and I was shocked by what I found. I found an incredible comic book series that is like hundreds of comics long, publishing every day. And they're so well done. They're so well made. Like, I assumed they were official. That entire day, I spent hours reading these comics, which I haven't spent hours reading any comic book since I was 13. I haven't spent hours reading anything since I was in, uni. I mean, come on, this is crazy. I was so engaged. I was so enthralled. I mean, they're so good. They're so professionally written and drawn, and dang, for short panel comics, they're amazing. And they're fan-made. I mean, this is technically fan fiction, though I don't even want to call it that because it gives it this label of not being that good. But no, I mean, I would, without a heartbeat, consider this a sequel to the series or a continuation of the series because they're just so good. I mean, my enjoyment of the series is not going to end with the show. I'm absolutely going to continue to love and enjoy the Owl House. In fact, I found some fan art that acted as like a perfect wallpaper. I don't know if behind my head. Can you see them? They're up there. They're in front of the Lego spaceship. But there's these posters that I have on my wall, and they're in this specific style. And I found a painting of the Owl House that matches that. So I'm literally rearranging my room just so I can fit a new poster in there because I love the show just that much. I recommend the Owl House to any fantasy fan, to any cartoon fan, to anybody. This show is amazing. I just went out to dinner with some friends where I recommended it to literally everyone because, man, it's really, really good. I'm happy that I found yet another passion for me to love. I mean, the total whiplash of watching The Wire and then watching this, it's a lot, but I'm happy to find a show that's just sweet. It's just so sweet. So yeah, that's my thing of the week. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you guys did, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of our content, you can check out our RPG Horror Story series, where we cover the best of the worst of Dungeons & Dragons. Guys, the support on the most recent episodes has been legitimately overwhelming. Thank you so much for all the love you've given the channel recently. It's been amazing. For all you new people, thank you so much for stopping by. Hope you guys enjoy. Anyway, RPG Horror Stories, link to the cards. And while you're there, subscribe to Crispy's Tavern to get more of our content as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment Dagger Hearts to let me know you made it to the end of the show. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.